So we've got our next guest presentation coming up now. We have Blatij. We have Damien here who's going to take us through their latest work. This is an animated short called Paths of Hate. This has won a number of awards around the world. It's currently being screened in electronic theater. Which award does it won in electronic theater now? Not for, but for SIGGRAPH was the jury?
Jury award.
The jury award. So it won the jury award for Paths of Hate. Fantastic piece, largely done with 3ds Max. Just a beautiful look. And so we're going to let Damien take it away and take us through what went into it.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, Sean. And my name is Damien Nenov, and I am director of this Paths of Hate short animated film. And I come from Poland. I work in Blatij film studio. And the Paths of Hate is a 10-minute long, completely 3D animated short film. And this year it is being screened on festivals all over the world. And it has won some prizes already, as Sean already mentioned. And 2 weeks ago, it won Comic-Con. So a few days later, it won Animamundi in Brazil. And here at SIGGRAPH Film Festival, it was awarded with a jury award. So, and since it is not a quick thing to show, I mean, it's 10 minutes long, I won't be able to present you the whole piece during this presentation. But I prepared a selection of sequences, which is 5 minutes long. And I cut out like half of it, mostly from the second part. So it won't spoil you the story, I hope. And so let's get it started. The actual 4 minutes of Paths of Hate. Okay, so that's it.
Excellent work.
Thank you for your patience. I'm glad you like it. And so it was a little bit less than a half of it, the first half. And the whole piece will be screened here at SIGGRAPH on during the electronic theater between 6 and 8 p.m. today and for the next 2 days. So I will be like extremely happy if you would like to come there and watch the whole piece without any cuts. And as I already mentioned, I work in Blatiež Film Studio, and in there I am animation director and a head of layout team. And Blatiež in Blatiež we produce a lot of different stuff. We do commercial, of course, commercials, and we do VFX for full-length features. We do game cinematics, trailers, and so on. And of course, we do short animated films. And probably some of you may had the chance already to watch our other short films like The Cathedral or The Fallen Art or The Ark. And all of them won best prizes here at SIGGRAPH as well. And The Paths of Hate is like the most recently produced short in our studio. And Blatiež has a very typical structure and workflow for this kind of project. I mean, we have a big team of CG artists divided into smaller micro teams. But in case of Paths of Hate, there were only a few people fully involved into production. And in practice, there was like 10 artists working with me, mostly during the second part, during the rendering part. But in practice, I executed like 80% of the film by myself. And if you would like to sum up all this time we devoted to work on Paths of Hate, you will get a little bit over a year of constant work, a year and a half. And this pre-production part with the script and all the storyboards, it was done 5 years ago. It was quite a long time ago. But the very production itself, it was started at the end of 2008, and it was finished at the very end of 2010. So the idea, I don't want you to get bored, so it'll be a few basic facts, and I don't want you to tell a lot about the idea and the plot of Paths of Hate in order to not spoil it for you. But the idea, it came to me just 5 years ago, as I already mentioned, when I was still studying at Polish National Film School. And it was my own idea, a very simple one. A short, not complicated, surrealistic anecdote about a duel of two fighter planes that, let's say, you might not complete without losing your humanity. And I'm a huge fan of aviation, so let's say that I just couldn't imagine a subject more exciting for an animated short, dynamic short film than a duel of two fighter planes. So I don't want to tell you anything more about the story, but there is one thing I wanted to show you that might be considered as a most direct reference for the story and idea of Paths of Hate. So there was a photo I saw somewhere, one of these that you can see there. And these photographs are probably taken in London during a Battle of Britain in 1940. So as you can see, there are hundreds of white lines, trails left by planes that were fighting there. And when I saw those photographs, I thought that some of these lines might be like the only remains of planes and pilots who didn't survive this one particular battle, for example. So it was quite strong for me, and I thought that there must be hundreds of stories behind them, and I named the film because of them. So these are the paths from the title. So that's it. Let's proceed to the technical part. And the whole film, The Paths of Hate, was entirely done inside 3 Studio Max 2009. And few complete shots were done in Maya 3D. So probably the most noticeable thing in Paths of Hate is its stylization. And by stylization, I mean this comic book look of the film. So when I was writing a script for it, I already knew that I don't want it to be photorealistic 3D animated film. I wanted it to be stylized. So I conducted like a huge number of tests and trials. Like I was searching for this most proper look for this film, and the final choice was the cartoon. And then I just find this Dennis Byram's graphic novel titled Universal War I. And let's say that I just tried to recreate the style and character of his comic illustrations in 3D. And I succeeded. So the first test of this new stylization was the 1 minute long teaser of Paths of Hate. It was done in 2006, so it is quite long, quite old, and here it is. So, okay, that's it. And the technology itself, it wasn't overly complicated. It was probably it was all about composition. And these are the breakdowns of few shots. It will show you the combination and the order of layers that I used there. So, as you can see from the storyboard to the final image. And for the typical shot in Paths of Hate, I used like 10 to 15 layers. But there were shots containing even 45 layers. So this is how it looked like. Okay, but the next shot might spoil the story too much for you, so I will skip it, sorry. But, so, the first layer, it was the simplest one, a solid color layer, a typical one, no philosophy behind it. So then comes the occlusion pass, also typical one. I used V-Ray to render those. And there comes the diffuse layer. As you can see, it contains all the lighting, so all the lights were put together in this one. Usually there was no need to have them separated, so it was another simple layer. And here is another example of this diffuse layer. We used V-Ray global illumination, some simple presets to render this one. And here comes one of the two most important layers in Paths of Hate. So this is the outline layer. And I used this V-Ray atmospheric tool called V-Ray Tune to render this one. And it worked pretty well, especially with this low polygon geometry. And I used V-Ray dirt maps, which are occlusion shader, to map the thickness of these lines. And it gave them a little bit of this comic book look. So this is how it works in Shoot. So the outline layer and the complete shot. And then comes the second most important layer in Paths of Hate, which is drawings layer, a hand-drawn textures. And this one, I mean, this drawings layer combined with this previous one, outline layers, these two makes this key element of stylization in Paths of Hate. So you can say that this whole stylization is all about these two layers, the outline layer and the drawing layer. So these are most important layers in Paths of Hate. And these are a few examples of hand-drawn textures. I've drawn them by myself. And another one. And for most of those objects, I use a typical UVW map textures. But for some of them, I had to prepare a projected textures, as for this one, for example. But for some shots that contains a lot of movement, like this one, for example, I had to prepare more than just one projected texture. Usually three of them were enough. So this is how it works. Of course, there were a lot of less important effects layers and masking layers. These are a few examples of them. A lot of it. So, as you can see, there was no big philosophy behind it. It was all about composition. But the next thing I wanted to show you is far more complicated. So it's probably easy to guess that the most difficult and most challenging element to create in Paths of Hate were clouds. And it's always difficult to create clouds in 3D, especially if you want them to be photorealistic. And if you want them to be photorealistic and stylized at the same time, it's even more difficult. So, and the choreography of the stock fights and camera animation in Paths of Hate are very spacious. So there was like no way to use any half measures such as fake made painted flat planes or stock photos. These clouds, they had to be completely three-dimensional. And since I wanted to have a full control over the shape and the color and the lighting of these clouds, they had to be geometry-based. And of course, you always can use volumetric solutions, but these are very hard to control and slow to render. So I already knew that my clouds, they had to be geometry based. These are a few shots from the film with a lot of clouds. That's it. And so I created these low polygon geometry elements to represent clouds. And I use them like puzzles, like bricks, from which I build this whole complex cloud sets. And this is a closer look from one of them. And this is the layout, the animatic of Paths of Hate. And as you can see, I use those low polygon geometry clouds to build complete cloud sets in order to have these planes and the camera animated accordingly to the actual shape of the clouds. And probably if I choose to use volumetric solutions, it could be quite impossible for me to see the actual shape of the cloud. So it was the only option. And to that point, it was quite easy. I mean, the real problem was the lighting and translucency effect, because clouds are all about translucency effect. And I spent some time looking for a proper solution to add this translucency effect for my geometric clouds. And in these few examples, I faked this translucency effect using simple direct ambient-only lights in Free Studio Max, but it is still far from being acceptable. So I spent some time more searching for, let's say, ultimate solution. And I finally did. I found one, and surprisingly, it was an old and forgotten vertex color tool in Free Studio Max. So using this vertex color tool, vertex color data, I was able to illuminate those clouds and still have full control over the shape and the translucency effect. And it was all about playing a little with textures to get a photorealistic result, or if you want to, and in case if you don't want them to be stylized like this. So this solution is very elastic. You can achieve almost every effect you want. And these are few examples of and tests, early tests of them. And what I did is I prepared this step-by-step, very fast tutorial to show you how I did those clouds. And
don't blink. Don't blink, you might miss it.
Okay, so the first step was to create those low poly geometric base cloud, and then I covered it with hundreds of small spheres, as you can see, just to add a little bit of cloudy shape to this box thing. And the next step will be, in the next step I will combine all these spheres and this box shape inside of it into one mesh object using some simple Boolean operations, as you can see. And the next step will be, in the next step I will map it using automatic mapping tool in Free Studio Max. It works perfectly well for this kind of objects. So as you can see, automatic mapping. And then I just set up a very simple lighting rig. I used two simple lights and V-Ray global illumination based on some simple presets. And I did it in order to bake all this lighting into our light maps. And then I will convert these light maps into a vertex color data. And it turns out that the simple vertex paint tool in Free Studio Max does the trick without any problem. It converts texture to vertex color data, as you can see. And the next step was to use an old plugin called translucency mode to fake this translucency effect. It works in a very simple way. It just expands each vertex color data using a spherical volume, but you can achieve the same result just playing with layers, with vertex color layers. So it is quite easy. And then I just covered this low poly geometry cloud with 6,000 of small sprites, and each of them has a alpha channel textures on them. And there comes the tricky part. I had to transmit this vertex color data from this base geometry cloud to those sprites. And it turns out that the simple projection modifier in 3D Studio Max does the trick without any problem, since the vertex color doesn't use any UVW mapping. So this is how it works. I added the materials. And the funniest thing about this solution is the render times, because for one 2K frame full of clouds, it took like 30 seconds to render without any ray trace engines. I use a simple scanline renderer, as you can see. So this is the result of this tutorial. A very weird shaped cloud. Okay, so that's it about the clouds. I think we have some few minutes left. Am I right? Okay, so I will show you some more stuff about animations and models. So the entire animation in Paths of Hate was done inside the 3D Studio Max. I used cat rigs, the character animation toolkit for character rigs, as you can see. It was typical keyframe animation. There was no motion capture data used in Paths of Hate. It is all keyframed by hand. And for more complex shots, I used simple NURB curves to control the animation. I use them like paths to follow. It's probably the most common way to animate those kind of objects, like planes or missiles, or this kind of vehicles. And this is how it looked like inside the viewport. Okay. And once again, this is the layout of Paths of Hate. And one of the most important goals for me to achieve in this film was to combine the realistic camera animation with the stylized picture. And I wanted this camera to be animated as a real one, like if it was held by a human operator sitting in some invisible third plane chasing those two. So this camera work is a very important element in Paths of Hate. Okay, so I have a few more things just after those, the end titles. So since we have like 2 minutes left, so I can show you. I can have, oh, okay, so great. Okay, so we had like two historical planes inside of, in my film. And one of them was the very famous one, British fighter plane, the Supermarine Spitfire. And the another one was the German one, the Messerschmitt 109, also very famous. And these are photographs of real planes from Polish museums. And the origin of these planes, it wasn't that important for me, because the funny thing is that for the European audience, the German fighting planes or German soldiers are almost always received as bad guys. And I don't want that. I mean, in my film, they had to be equal. They had to be anonymous. So this origin of these planes, it wasn't that important for me. We had plenty of good quality blueprints of them. It was quite easy to build models on top of them, as you can see now. And these models are very simple because almost every small details were drawn onto textures. So there was no need to have them modeled. I mean, the external details. But it is quite different in case of cockpits. This is the Messerschmitt cockpit. As you can see, almost every detail had to be modeled because there were a lot of close-ups on them. So they had to be very precisely modeled. And this is a Spitfire cockpit. And those cockpits, they had to endure a large number of close-ups and very extreme angles, like this, for example. So everything had to be modeled. And planes in Paths of Hate, they get progressively damaged. And but since there are no shots showing the damage actually happening, I decided to create free versions of damaged aircraft. So this is like the light damaged version and not damaged version. This is the medium damaged version and a severe damaged version of them. And this is the same for the Spitfire. As you can see, the Spitfire has its engine cover torn off, so there is an actual model of engine inside, which is a Rolls-Royce engine, and this is a true fact. And this is how it looked like in shoot.